Hello and welcome back. This is Dave Heckroth. This is part 2 of our business review of IBM ODM version A8 Business Console. It's part of the prolific Smarter Process Tech Talk series, and we're going to continue on with the ODM demonstration from where we left off in part 1. Here's the agenda where we've shown the sections that we've already reviewed. Now we're going to jump into a sample business challenge. We call that the TLP insurance rating, and going to show a number of knowledge characteristics about that. Then we'll drop into a demo from the product's perspective. Okay, so for demo purposes, we're going to use this as our business challenge. TLP is an insurance company. They are currently having trouble with their underwriting rules, underwriting business decisions. The consistency across the enterprise is challenged. They have rules that change a lot, and IT can't keep up with changing times. They can't move at the speed of business, like we talked about before. It takes them too long to make the rule changes. It takes too long to promote those to their production environment. Now, specifically, we're dealing with a business decision that we call determine pricing tier. Okay, it consists of 3 sub-decisions. That's determine the financial stability, determine coverage liability, determine property risk. Those are the 3 underlying characteristics which influence pricing. And here we can see the knowledge broken down into a variety of decision tables. This is not really a formal decision model per se, not like a DMN model, TDM model, or whatnot, but it does give you an idea of how the knowledge relates to each other, how it rolls up into the idea of making a pricing tier decision. You can see the top left decision table called pricing tier rules has 3 premise conditions, and in our case, these are 3 attributes which are determined from the other decision tables, hence the 3 sub-decisions. I'll just go over this first attribute and outline the fact that in pricing tier rules, the first premise is customer financial stability. You can see that particular attribute is solved for in the financial stability rules, where it sets the financial stability to some value, and it has a number of premise conditions that it relies on in order to make that assignment. So up in the pricing tier rules, if it wanted to obtain an attribute value of excellent, we can see that there's only a few conditions under which it would do that. Years in business greater than 5, number of bankruptcies equal to 0, and no real care for the third attribute would produce a value excellent, just as an example. So now let's take a look at what an interface might look like that actually calls this decision, right? We're going to call this TLP decision service from a web interface. And we've developed one here. I just took a snapshot of it for our benefit. You can see where we've outlined the information about the customer, the property, and the coverage. By identifying all that input information and hitting the submit button, we then get some information populated in the assessment part of the web page, which provides values for financial stability, property risk, and coverage liability, and then the ultimate pricing tier, which is what we're hoping to achieve. Now let's drop into the tool, and we can take a look and see how ODM represents the information from a business console perspective. We're going to highlight a number of things. Rather than take you through all the PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint, I'm actually going to drop into the tool. So I've actually brought up my version of Decision Center Business Console. I've got it running on my local PC, so it's got a local URL address, port 9080. You can see it's Decision Center. And in that, I've got a number of tabs. The Library tab allows me to select the decision service that I want to investigate. And here I can enter into the one called TLP BAL. If I do that, I see that I've got a number of options, right? Services that are deployed in version 8.8 have one of two formats. They're either a standard rule set, or they're going to be a decision rule set. Now let me show you what I mean by that. So you bring up the rule project and you need to select a template. The newer version and the one that's ultimately going to win out long term is a decision service rule project, and you can select one of three options depending on whether it's the main rule project or whether it's just a standard rule project moving forward. In earlier versions of the product, you could go with the classic rule project format, but this decision service rule project format allows you to take advantage of the rule governance framework, and the other one does not. So in this case, we did use the decision format, and when we bring that up in our web version of the product, we see that it has that special icon, the one with the double arrow. That denotes that it is of decision format. Okay, so we'll go into the one called TLP. When we do that, we have the ability with the business console to create a series of artifacts, one of which, and the one you start with, is the release. When you initially port the decision service framework to Decision Center, you're going to have this initial release, and it's going to show the project and its corresponding rule categories, things of that nature. And I recommend going in and creating your own release so that you can manage it yourself. So I've created the summer release here, and I'm going to go into that. And we'll take a look and see what the artifacts look like. You can see that the activities that are associated with that given release are of a couple different types. One is a change activity, one where you can actually go in and make modifications to particular decisions, and a verification activity where you go in and basically approve its completeness and ultimately to port it to some rule execution server location as you need. But we'll get into that in just a minute. Let's initially take a look around. We've got a whole series of hyperlinks that you can select when you come into Decision Center from the release pane. You've got activities, decision artifacts, you've got tests and simulations, deployments, and snapshots. We'll go over what some of those are as it applies to our change set right here. So let's go ahead. I've created a framework that we can fall into just so that we can get through the demonstration faster. It is a change activity. If I want to create one new, I would just click on the down arrow and I could create a new change activity or a new validation activity. But for our purposes, since I've already created that framework, let's go ahead and drop into that. And when we do, we notice that ODM creates decision artifacts that represent the business decision as it's been implemented to this point in time. And we can see that those, for the case of TLP, it has a rule flow. You can look at that rule flow and see that it is a process of making these three sub-decisions, and then ultimately falls into the pricing tier decision and determines that as well. Each of these project folders, each of these knowledge folders are managed the same way they are on the PC version of the product, so it's not going to be any different. For our purposes here, let's take a closer look at a little bit of the knowledge. In the case of the pricing tier rules, this is the subcategory that leverages the information from the other three rule sections and makes the decision. We saw that in our decision table. We have an implementation that is a decision table type implementation. We can also build these rules in a more action language sort of format. I'll show you that in just a minute with one of the other sections. I actually converted it to an action language rule. But since in this case the knowledge is all of a similar form, a similar pattern, we decided to implement in a decision table. So I can simply click on that hyperlink to get a view of what the knowledge looks like for pricing tier, decision table pricing tier knowledge. Now, I've got some icons over here that allow me to do some things. This is the decision table view. You can see because it has the little icon around it. I can enter the edit mode if I want to refer, edit and modify one of these things. I can certainly do that. When I decide I want to edit the pricing tier rules, I'll simply look at the decision table. I'll hit the little pencil symbol, and I can go in and modify it. Let's just review again. See how this view is in the business console? It's going to look very, very close to the knowledge that existed just kind of from a knowledge representation standpoint. You see it's kind of a tabular view. It's got premise conditions here to the left. It's got conclusion conditions to the right. And we're going to see that that's very similar to what we see in Decision Center, right? The premise conditions here to the left, multiple values that you can enter here, and then the corresponding conclusion values here to the right. And we're going to go in and actually make a change here. Before we actually change, what I'd like to do is to run a test on this to show that we're getting a certain value, and then when we make a change, we'll rerun that test, verifying that a new change was made. So if we want to test before we actually go in and make a change, I'll show you how you can do that. It's really easy. We can select the test hyperlink. We can look in there, and I've actually been able to go ahead and create a number of test cases themselves. Let's actually look at the one that says TLP baseline. That's the one that I intended to run just from the very beginning when I came in. Now I could actually run it from here, but let me bring it up and show you what the test editor looks like. There's quite a bit of information available to you. It gives you the activity. It tells you that you're running a test against the change activity. It gives you a little bit of focus. It tells you the format of the test itself. Gives you some idea of what it's going to call the report that it creates, and a number of the options from a testing reporting perspective. It's going to put those out in an Excel file for you. It's going to use a particular test file that you tell it about. Now you can actually create that template from the previous test screen. I'll show you how to do that. But here, let's take a look at the actual test itself. It's got the scenario that you're going to go through, and this scenario really is nothing more than an Excel file that provides the input values that correspond to the request being made to the service. And notice how you don't have any values in what's going to be determined in your particular decision service, right? So financial stability is going to be derived. No need to put any values there. Coverage liability is also going to be derived. No need to put any values there. We can see property risk is going to be derived as a subdecision also. No need to put any values there. The ultimate decision is, of course, pricing tier, and that's the one we're going to pay extra special attention to. So that the test knows whether what we return back is correct or not, we've got this tab called Expected Results, and it provides a connection between the results that are actually obtained with those that we think should be obtained, and supplies those. Now you'll notice that here we have scenario 1 and scenario 2. Back in the scenarios, it is uniquely identified for each of those, and you can see that the inputs for each condition are going to produce a given output, right? So if we take just scenario 2, right, and we look at all the values that are supplied by that one, right, we're going to say, let's look at the expected results and say, okay, it's going to produce coverage liability of medium, financial stability of excellent, property risk of medium, and it's going to come back with a pricing tier that's going to be equal to B. And so when we run it, let's pay special attention to that, and we'll see if that's indeed what happens. So once back at the test suite screen, you can come through, and notice when you come over the hyperlink, it enables certain action keys, right? I can actually go in and run the test suite directly from this hierarchical view. And why don't I go ahead and do that? I'm just going to click on it. It asks me to run the test suite. I say yes. Gives me kind of interactive screen. And notice the status here. It's currently in like a working mode. This kind of simulates in process. Here in just a second, that will change shapes. Now it's 20% done. It will also change shapes to show a little more progress in just one moment. Okay, and here it is done. Only took about 2 or 3 seconds, what you would expect. And we can see that the report got generated. Let's go ahead and look at the report and see what that looks like. It's a hyperlink. We'll just click on that. And we can see that we had 2 scenarios. Both of them were successful. They had 4 steps, which makes a certain amount of sense, right? Because we were making 3 sub-decisions and a final decision. Each one of those is identified as a step. You can see that all the expected results were matched exactly. Let's look at the second one, right? Second scenario is the one that had the B, right? It was the excellent, medium, medium B. So let's go ahead and look at that. And you know what? Sometimes as you go through this as well, you'll find that the system will occasionally cause you to relog in. It's a timing issue, and if you've been in one screen too long, it will cause you to do that. So no alarm. We'll just go in there and access the report again, and we can see that from the details, right? These are the actual results, the expected results, and you can see they match 1 for 1. Okay, so that gives us confidence that it did indeed return the values that we expect, so that now if we go in and actually make some changes, we can rerun the same baseline, verifying that it gets different results. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go out to our decision artifacts. Those are all the rules themselves. We'll go out to the pricing tier rules and we'll go into edit mode so that we can edit that particular subdecision, and we can see the one that produces B, right? Excellent, medium, any value, and B. So what we're going to do, let's say we change that from B to D. Okay? We're going to save that. It's going to ask us for some information, and of course you would go in and enter some of that information, perhaps a change request number or whatnot. It will show you the changed result, and then you can go in and run the test again. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Go back to the library, the test screen, and just from a baseline perspective, let's rerun this one, and then what we'll do is see that the second one does not complete successfully, and that's indeed what we would expect, right? So we'll go ahead and do that. Give it just one moment. It's going to load it. You can see that it's thinking about it. It, of course, has the new time, right? This one was 4:32. This one is indeed 4:35, just a minute or two later. Notice the status changed, right? It's no longer the green because that was 100% successful. It's now this exclamation point where only one of the 2 scenarios ran successfully. And let's take a look at the baseline report. You can see that the second one was almost correct, right? We got everything except what looks like the very last step. And if we had to guess what that is, it's of course the pricing tier, right? The actual result was D, and what we have in our test script is that we expected a B. And we know that we changed it, so this is in fact returning to us the answer that we expect. Okay, so again, if I wanted to make sure that that test ran successfully and the new scenario was dynamic, I would go in and I would create a new test case. And so I would call it something like TLP modify the pricing tier. I would create a new test file, and I would go ahead and run it. When I did, I think I would find that the result I would ask for would be D instead of the previous B of baseline, and I think I would find that it will be successful. Let's give it here just 1 second. We can see that there is a check mark. Let's go in and look at the details of the report. Yes, in fact, our scenario was successful. And let's review again. Really, the only thing different here is the fact that I told it its expected result is now a D and it is in fact what it's returning, so it acknowledges this as a successful run. Okay, so I've showed you how to modify an existing rule, right? We went in and changed this rule number 3 to derive a different outcome. Now let's go and add a completely different rule. Okay, for this, let's just go ahead and stay in the same pricing tier decision table, and we'll make that change. What we're going to do is we're going to specialize this last rule. Here we say in Rule 9, if the financial stability is poor, no matter what the other two are, we're just going to reject it. So let's kind of add a little bit to that. We have some advantages here in the business console. We can treat this a lot like an Excel spreadsheet, right? We can just highlight the fields and use our typical Microsoft Office shortcut keys. I can hit highlight everything, hit Control C. Notice how it changes the color of the highlight. Come down here to row 10, hit Control V, and look, it just pastes everything for me. So easy way to copy from one rule to the next. And now I'm going to specialize, because if I were to try and save it here, we have two rules doing exactly the same thing. It would give me some type of error condition. So let's kind of make the condition here be a little bit different. We're going to say if it's high or not high here, right? So if it's poor and it's high, one answer. Poor and it's not high, another answer. So we can then use our shortcut keys again. Let's do Control C down to here. Notice it's high. Control C down to the Rule 10. It's not high. Let's not concern ourselves with this, because this is really the discriminating characteristics. In this case, they're both reject. Let's say that this one is no longer reject. Let's call it, I don't know, anything, C, right? And so we'll hit save. Of course, it asks for a description on why you're making that change. We can absolutely go do that. We'll inspect the rules, right, that we just changed. Poor, high, C. Poor, not equal high, reject. So let's go ahead and run a test that kind of reflects what we've done. Okay, so we go back to our testing pane again, right? And we go to the test suites, and we have a test scenario called TLP add a rule. It's going to be conducive to the scenario that we just added. You can see that it's scenario file add a rule, and I've gone ahead and opened that in Excel so that we can take a look at it. Notice the financial stability, it is poor, right? Just like what we had changed. And the coverage liability, it's high, right? That was one of the two conditions, high or not high. We don't really care what the property risk is at this point, and we're going to assign it a value of C, because the row 9 that we changed in the rules with C, if it is not high, then it would, of course, be reject or refer, whatever we had identified. So that's the expected results. Here's a scenario file with the data, which will produce those results. And let's give that a run and see what that does, right? Here we're going to hit the run button. It says go ahead and run. We're going to say yes. Here we come into our reports, and we can see that it is in fact running. Runs fairly quickly, and indeed it produces a positive output. Now let's go ahead and take a look at that, and we can see when we drill into the sub-decisions and decisions, see how this new grouping of expectations is met by our test data, right? So earlier, all it would have looked for was poor, and no matter what these other values were, it would have produced a value of refer. And in our case, it returns a value of C. So that's a good thing. It shows that our test is complete, right? So poor, coverage liability high, pricing tier C. Okay, so the next step in our Decision Center Business Console review is I want to show you a little bit about the BAL rules, right? We've looked at some detail at decision tables. We saw what those look like. We can see that they're easy to understand, a very similar structure. Well, I've taken a different set of rules, the coverage liability rules, And I've represented those as BAL rules, business action language rules. And those have more of an if-then-else type construct. We can see when we click on them, it's got the construct of an if, some scenario structure, and then a then suggesting the outcome. Okay, and in our case, we have 9 of them. Those correspond to the requirements that we had, right, for coverage liability rules. Notice there are 5 or 9 individual outcomes that are derived from the coverage liability package. And let's say we want to add something to this, right? So maybe we have an outcome that suggests a new value for coverage, a new value for industry, and we want to produce some new coverage liability score. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. How do we do that? We come to our editor page. We can see that in coverage liability, we want to add a rule. So the plus button, click on that. We can add a new rule or a decision table. If we've got a whole series of rules that follow the same pattern, of course, we add a new decision table here. But in our case, it's a new rule. Let's call it CL_10. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. We'll create it. And when we do, it drops us into the template structure that allows us to add premise conditions. Now, in our case, this is kind of an intelligent editor, and this is a web-based product offering us the same intelligent, intuitive help that we would have if we were on the PC version of the product. So that's really a nice thing. It tells us that the rule is incomplete, meaning you've got to do something, right? So I've actually got cut and paste. I'm not going to walk through the intelligent editor. We've got that in another Tech Talk, so feel free to refer to that. I'm just going to actually paste the new rule. You can see that it's not a very complex rule. It simply asks if the coverage type is XXX and the industry is YYY, then set the coverage liability to medium high. Notice this is really a two-phase result. We don't have anything that even looks like that. But let me go ahead and save this. Just create that version, right? Oh, and again, my system will occasionally block me out if I've been waiting too long to, to talk to you and whatnot. Those are parameters that you can modify from a system setting perspective. It's just on my version of the product. I have not done that. So let me go in and recreate that new rule. Okay. Very good. And you can see that it's there. Let's go ahead and look at the summary view of that again. We know that from a decision artifact perspective, that is here at the bottom. If we want to look at it again, we can certainly do that. So it's not rocket science. So once that rule has been added to the rule set, then because of the rule flow referring to the rule set, I don't have to do anything else in order to get that rule to be considered. All I have to do is put its premise conditions in a request, and if it matches, it's going to produce that result. Let's just see how that works. We'll go back to the test screen and see if there isn't another test that we have. TLP, val rule added. We've got a new rule sheet that shows some new values. Let's take a look at that. And I brought that Excel file up here. Notice the two values that I've added underneath the coverage liability section, right? Coverage type is XXX, industry is YYY, and we would expect that value to then produce a medium high result. This is really the secret, right, of what we're looking for. We don't really care what happens over here because we only change the knowledge associated with a sub-decision, and whatever its corresponding pricing tier is, we're not going to care about that. So let's go ahead and run this test, and we'll see the outcome. Okay, here we go. Thinking about finishing, does its work. Now it's done. We'll look at the report. We'll see, yes, it was in fact successful because we showed the value that we expected of medium high was in fact that which was achieved. So we got a successful result. So good for us. Now that we've made our changes to our decision service, at some point it's going to come the time when you're deciding that all the changes that are necessary are done. You've tested all your changes. You've done like this unit testing for all your changes, and you're satisfied that the new decision is operating the way you want it to, and you're going to want to now deploy it to your rule execution server environment. Up till now, you've been running a server-based simulation of what that outcome would produce. So for you to access this with your external applications, you're going to have to deploy it to the rule execution server, and you could take advantage of calling it with some SOAP-style interface. I'll actually show you a quick and dirty example of that. So in order to do that, when we're done, we come back to our decision artifacts and our change activity, and we're going to walk through the workflow process. I know I haven't talked too much about this, but this is really the process that the business console engages in order to allow the services to then be promoted outside of the console. So I come in, and for my decision service, I come over to this metadata, and I would say, okay, from an authoring perspective, I'm done. I'm going to say that's finished. And then from a status perspective, I want to proceed to approval. And that approval status will allow me to then go in and look at the change activity and tell it that, okay, I'm ready to go. It's going to say, do I want to approve the changes? I'm going to say yes. I'm going to approve everything I did. I'm going to say go because I was ready for approval. And then once that approval step is complete, you'll notice that it says approve changes. The status of this particular change request is complete, and we're ready to go through the validation step. Notice just prior to going to the validation step, I'll bring up the release artifacts again and see how the change activity has now gone to a complete status because I went through and did all of the workflow management necessary to tell the system that my change is complete and I'm ready to now promote it. What it then allows me to do is to create a validation activity where the person that makes the changes to the decision service is not the ultimate governor of whether or not those changes get promoted to production. You can incorporate this new validation step where a completely different organization, person, group that is in charge of one or many change sets to verify that they satisfy the stringent testing characteristics that you have for this particular decision service. So I would then go into the validation step. I would then see that it has testers, and clearly it says working. I'm just going to give it kind of a pass-through approval, right? I'm not really going to perform any checks because I know that my testing from a change perspective was sufficient, and I'm really just wanting to show you how this works. We're going to proceed to approval. And when I do that, I see that I've got my testing is finished, my approval, it's approved the changes, and my status is changed to complete. So I can go back and look at the release details, and I can see that now everything is in a complete status, and now I'm ready to make a deployment to my rule execution server environment. So I'm going to click the deployment tab, and I can see in the deployment tab I have a deployment scenario that's going to allow me to deploy TLP-BAT, my application file, over to a server of my choosing. When I open it up, I see all the characteristics about the deployment, and it's got, the operations, the target server, things of that nature. And this is kind of a summary view. We can see that I'm going to promote it to a non-production server. It's going to have a name for the decision service. It's going to put it in an app file, things of that nature. If I look in the target section, I can see that it's targeted towards my local RES server and that it recognizes that as being a valid one. I'm going to go ahead and run this deployment. I can do it either by selecting here and then going up to deployment and clicking that. It gives me an overview of where it is I want to do it. Notice that the local res is identified as a server. Also notice that it describes the base version that originally got put out, the latest one that was updated, and the one that I'm going to be creating when I deploy. It'll allow me to create basically a deployment snapshot so that I can roll back if I ever wanted to, things of that nature. And then I just click deploy. It says be sure. I say yes. It goes through, and this is one I did before, and I'll go ahead and cancel that one. But here we're looking at the one that I just did, and it was successful. If I want to look at the details about it, I can see that it has all the pertinent information, but the important piece is that the new version was labeled 1.2. And so now I'm going to go out to my ODM rule execution server and verify that 1.2 is available for me and I can execute it. If I decide to execute it, I would expect those new changes that I just applied, the one where I provided an outcome of D, the one for C, things of that nature, would be applied. And we'll go ahead and run that. Give me just 1 second. Okay, so I wanted to show you how to go ahead and test that. Now that it's been deployed to our rule execution server, we have the ability to go out to some generic SOAP interface tool. I happen to use SOAP UI. You can use SOAP Sonar, any tool that allows you to define that request file in XML format so that you can call the decision service will suffice. Okay, and let's review for a minute the actual parameters that we need to enter in order to get one of our tests to fire the way we expect, right? So we're going to go back to our baseline report, and remember scenario 2 where we went out there and we entered values and we had new expected results. Originally, we expected B to be the answer, and we changed it from B to something else, right? We changed it from B to D. So the new answer is D. The old answer was B. So if we run it with these characteristics, we should be able to see that difference. So let's go ahead and do that. If we enter the entry point for the rule execution server, note that it has versions that allow us to access one or many updates that have been pushed to the server. In our case, our baseline was version 1.0. And if we were to run that with those values that we just identified, we would get the result of B, right? That's what we expect. Originally, when we pushed it out, it was B. Now, remember our new version was version 1.2. So we'll just make that simple change to the entry point, go ahead and rerun with the exact same request file, and notice now the result is D. So that indeed confirms that our new decision service did go out to the rule execution server. I am able to call it using this independent calling technique, and it should give us a high degree of confidence that what we changed in ODM is in fact what went out to the rule execution server and is now going to be made available to all our calling applications that call it as well. Okay, so now let's just do a little bit of a review of what we've done so far. From the business console, we kind of reviewed the web interface. We got a chance to see what some of the characteristics look like for the business console, the hierarchy view. We got to see a decision table view, a business action language rule. We got to see those things. We got to see some of the icons that drove the processing and how you would navigate to add a rule, modify a rule, things of that nature. We're able to do that in the business console. We're also able to test the baseline that we created. We're able to verify changes to a given rule set. We use the rule governance framework actually to approve changes. We did the creating of a release. We did a change activity and a validation activity. We deployed our change decision to the rule execution server, and we tested that and showed how to test it from an external testing tool, not ODM, which is what we did when we're actually making the change. But after we deployed it, we tested it separately, and we showed that we're able to do that successfully as well. So by automating the business decisions, now we're able to allow the business to maintain that decision logic. And I say if desired, because sometimes you have to be careful what you ask for. There is a responsibility that goes with making all those changes. You have to test and approve all the decision migrations, things of that nature. We are able to produce consistent responses to our business decisions using a BRMS tool and engine. We can provide reusable interface for the business decisions, meaning it's very consistent. That interface is exposed through the rule execution server, and we now can provide for those decisions to be scalable to a wide range of consumers for that decision all across the enterprise. It allows our business decisions to be governed in a predictable, fixed ways where there is accountability for all the decision logic changes. So I think those are all some very, very valuable things that we sometimes take for granted. And it basically comes out of the box, ODM version 8.8. Hope this has been helpful. Feel free to contact me. I'm going to put my information on the board here. Hang tight. So here you go. Feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to check out some of our other webcasts, podcasts, things of that nature. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.